Okay, welcome everyone to another edition of Temporal Summer Camp. Today, we have a really fun session planned for you. Our CTO and co-founder, Maxim Fateev, will be joining us to answer your questions. So I'm going to go ahead and bring Max on the stage. And hi, Max. How's it going today?
Very good.
Awesome.
I traveled to New Jersey, so my connection maybe not as good as I would like, but we'll see.
Awesome. Well, we'll make it work. Thank you for taking the time to join us. I know you're super busy. Cool. So just a real quick, do you want to do a quick intro and just introduce yourself to everybody on the stream?
Sure. My name is Maxim Fateev. I'm a co-founder and CTO of Temporal. I was CEO for over 4 years, but recently decided to go back to an IC role and focus on technology 100%. Yeah, so now I'm a CTO. And I've been around the software industry for over 20 years. I worked with various companies, like 8.5 years at Amazon, a couple of years at Microsoft, 4 years at Google, 4 years at Uber, and then we started the Temporal 4 years ago.
Fantastic.
And before starting the company, actually, I was IC all the time, so I never actually managed a single person. So I was an engineer. I'm still an engineer.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much. Cool. I guess we'll just go ahead and jump straight into some of the questions. So we have, what are some of the biggest challenges that you have faced while building Temporal?
Okay, it's actually probably a question we can talk a lot about. I think the biggest challenge was actually just coming up with the idea and getting a good developer experience, because this was big unknown, right? It took us a lot of iterations. So the whole project, you can think about it as a lot of attempts. The first attempt, actually multiple attempts were at Amazon. So we had 3 versions of the simple workflow service. Then someone did some work at the Microsoft with doing the task framework. Then we did the Uber, and then now we have Temporal. So it was just mostly just a lot of iterations. And certainly, when talking about Temporal itself, the hardest part obviously make it robust, because people run mission critical applications on that. And so it means that every little thing becomes big can of worms when you start thinking about infinite scalability and guarantees of execution and latency. And one thing anyone who joins our company learns very fast that even simple things ends up being very complicated because of that. Just a lot of complexity. But my philosophy is that I would rather us to spend more time and 10x effort to implement something if it makes developer experience better. And at the same time, we cannot compromise on scalability. So it means that certain features which are trivial to implement if you have, for example, single database and don't care about scale, become extremely hard if you need to implement them for infinite scalability.
Okay, fantastic. Let's go on to our next question. What upcoming features or improvements are you most excited about?
So I'm probably the most excited right now is about Nexus. So Nexus is the, who is not familiar with that, is other way to call it is Nexus RPC. The idea is that you can define interfaces like services. You can think of as RPC services, but the idea is that they have semantic of temporal, so any RPC call can take any amount of time. It can be short, but it can be very long. So imagine an RPC call which can take a week or months, but it's still well defined. And in the context of temporal, it allows you to do cross namespace calls, so you can call workflows in other namespaces. But we hide all the complexity of the workflow. For example, when you make a call, you just say this is an operation name, and this is the timeout I'm willing to wait, and this is my input, and wait for some output. If it's implemented as a workflow, all the complexity around like task queue, timeouts, retry policies, all these things are hidden. and makes it very powerful. So it allows to define high-level interfaces. I think this will allow practically people to use Temporal as a kind of this asynchronous service mesh, right, which allows to all service in the enterprise communicate without relying on queues explicitly. That is the one, and there are all sort of other features, but the most basic, another one which has been around for a long time, but we are finally getting to production quality is update. Ability to send updates to the workflow and wait synchronously for the result, which allows to all sort of interactive use cases. Because you practically can make a workflow which, for example, allows you to do sequence of pages. And imagine workflow which says show page 1, block there, wait for form submission, show page 2, wait for form submission. And then you can have all sort of conditional logic, background processing, and so on and so on. So updates make it very powerful.
Yes, I've been really excitedly waiting for workflow update. I've been wanting to play around with it a little bit. Cool. We have a question from a member of the audience who it's a little bit more technical, but what needs to be set up for Temporal? I believe Temporal to be compliant with FedRAMP, FIPS compliant, IL5 Temporal self-hosted.
Okay, I'm not expert on FedRAMP. I've heard it's complicated. But conceptually, it is Temporal open source is fully self-contained, and the only real dependency of Temporal's open source is database and Elasticsearch, potentially. So if you set up it in the FedRAMP compliant environment, and you have FedRAMP compliant database and dependencies, that I think should be enough. I think we are doing also some additional, we are not done fully yet, but we are doing additional work to validate the dependencies will go into the compiling Temporal binary, but I don't think this was released yet. But otherwise, we just, again, make sure that all your dependencies are FedRAMP compliant. But you need to run it itself. If you're Temporal Cloud, still not there. We certainly want to be there, but we are not there.
Fantastic. I guess another question around self-hosted, or maybe just in general, but how do you do capacity planning for setting up Temporal?
Oh, it's complicated. But basic idea is that it's certainly very use case specific, how much resources you use, right? So it's very hard to just say general capacity planning without understanding the resources you use by your applications. So it means that you need to do some sort of testing and then project the usage and then practically plan ahead. With our cloud, for us, it's a little bit simpler because we have very large number of clients and very large number of use cases. So we are multi-tenant, so we can kind of bin pack and leverage that. But if you are doing your own self-hosting, then I think just testing and figuring out the load and doing projection for the peak load, I think is the only way.
Okay, and I think we have one more self-hosted question. Is Temporal available as a managed service in any cloud provider like AWS?
Yes, absolutely. This is what we call Temporal Cloud. But one thing is to understand about Temporal as a managed service is that our model is that, as you know, Temporal has backend cluster, right? And which sits on top of a database in the open source. And then you have SDKs, which are part of your application. And even if you're using Temporal Cloud, you still run your application. Temporal Cloud doesn't run your code. So it's part of your, lives in your VPC, lives in your clusters. You deploy them anyway, you kind of usually deploy them. And all they need is a connection to the backend cluster. And if you're using open source, it just will be the connection to the open source cluster. But if you're using cloud, you will be connection to the appropriate namespace. You get the connection string from when you provision it through our cloud APIs or UI. And I think one important thing to understand is from security point of view, it's a pretty good model because first, you don't run, we don't run your code. Second is that your code can encrypt all payloads using your algorithms and keys before sending them to our cloud. because we never need to look into the context, like the payloads. We just pass through them. And the third one is that all this SDKs only connect to the backend clusters, to the cloud. Cloud never connects to back, so you don't need to open any holes in your firewalls. We only need practically connection to the endpoint, which is usually for large companies done through the private link.
Fantastic. Cool.
Sorry, just one thing I forgot the original question. So, and our cloud is available right now in AWS, and we recently added GCP. So you can provision Temporal Cloud itself. And we also have multiple regions. I don't know, 13 or 14 regions right now for AWS. So you can, when you create a namespace, you actually can pick the appropriate region for your use case. And we also have multi-region replication and failovers. So if you need high availability.
Awesome. Someone asks, can you speak to the short-term roadmap for the next 90 days?
I don't think we wanna talk about that, like, because let's say this way: go to our conference, Replay, join us at Replay. Our conference will be in September, and we will announce a bunch of stuff there. So and demonstrate a bunch of stuff there. And I think the best way to learn about what's delivered is to come to our conference. A few things, like as I mentioned, like updates certainly will be there, like the Nexus also will be there, but certainly more things are coming and more things will be shown.
Yeah, it's a great opportunity for us to plug our Replay conference. So as Max said, we have a Replay conference happening in Seattle's East Side in Bellevue here September 18th through the 20th. If you enter promo code webinar20, you will get a discount on the tickets. And if you want to come learn about all the new cool things that are happening in Temporal, I would say come to the conference. We can't give it away before we have the conference. So yeah, I'm looking forward to that. Next question. We got a few questions coming in now, so it's pretty exciting from the audience. What would be the best way to approach implementing Temporal into an existing mature project? In this user's use case, it's a payment service running on Next.js as a backend on Kubernetes.
So nice thing about Temporal that it doesn't require you kind of overhauling your architecture to start using that, because as a trans part of your service, and it's just a library. So if you can just add it to your service, and then you can just edit a single function. So you can always start small from a single distributed cron job, because Temporal is like the best distributed scheduler for periodic jobs, but it can be anything else. So existing architecture, certainly I cannot give you a specific recommendation because I don't know your existing architecture, but very common, for example, people implement this type of architectures using, for example, queues. You absolutely can plug Temporal in a single service and receive and publish messages to queues. With time, you will realize that queues are excessive, and you can just replace all of them with Temporal activities and workflows, and in the future Nexus. But point is that you always can implement that gradually, right? So you can always move from like non-temporal architecture to temporal architecture in a gradual and very controlled manner. And this is what we recommend. I certainly don't recommend like full rewrites, just unless you're doing new development. So it's very, very common to introduce temporal into the existing architectures and gradually refactor them. Example I give is at Uber. There was a payment platform built on top of Kafka, and it's kind of pretty standard thing, bunch of services talking through messages. And this team approached us and practically said, we have use case when some external dependency can be down for 3 days. Practically some bank set our SLAs, bank holiday plus a weekend, we can be down. And they couldn't retry for 3 days from Kafka, so they plugged Temporal just for that use case, because we can retry indefinitely, right, as long as you want. But when after we left Uber started Temporal, we actually learned that the whole architecture was rewritten as a bunch of workflows. So practically they threw out Kafka and rewrote all their services. And there was a webinar. Unfortunately, recording wasn't released, which practically said they've got so many benefits from that architecture, like better latency, no errors, and so on and so on. So yeah, it's a very common.
Yeah, and I think an example that I've seen, I've watched both of Matt McDowell's presentations from Yum Brands, where he gave the presentation at Replay, talking about how they adopted Temporal and slowly added it into services. So the answer to this question could go to our YouTube page and look up some of the Replay conference talks that were done by Yum Brands, and they dive deep into this pretty well. Another question from the audience. Are there any plans to simplify Temporal's usage to be more like ingest or convex?
I'm not expert on these two technologies, but we certainly always look into the way to simplify. I know that, for example, hosting code comes up all the time, and we are considering that as well. From other point of view, like most enterprises don't actually love that we don't host their code, and they can host their code and encrypt everything. It just makes security reviews much easier. But we always look for simplification. But one thing is to understand is that I would say temporal APIs are pretty minimalistic, and they are, but given the feature set. You can simplify them by removing features, but I think every feature is there because there are real use cases which require that. Because this platform was built very iterative. We didn't have a lot of features when we started that. So I would say if you have specific ideas how to simplify things, I would love to hear them. But reality is that I hear proposals about simplification all the time. But when we start looking at the specific details, specific use case, specific reasons why we built this way, it's very rarely these approaches actually become like they usually don't work, right? And so I can discuss specifics, but you can always hit me on the Slack with private message if you wanna, or just in the channel we can discuss that. But reality is that when you start adding all the features we have, complexity is there. It should be there.
Awesome. Yeah. So yeah, Max there mentioned the Slack channel. So if you're not aware, Temporal has a community Slack that Max is in, and so a lot of our SDK engineers, I'm in it. So if you ever have any questions or you need support for Temporal stuff, and you just want to ask around, you can always join our Slack channel, and you can find that by just Googling the Temporal Slack. I believe the URL.
Just,
yeah.
Temporal.io/Slack, I think works.
Yeah. So you can easily just go there and join our Slack, and you can ask Max all about those questions. We have a question that came in about pricing, and it actually got a few upvotes. So it says, currently Temporal Cloud costs a minimum $200 a month. Is there any plans to reduce this price?
Absolutely. We certainly understand that it's not very friendly to individual developers. And our goal is to have consumption-only service and maybe even free tier. We are careful about introducing those just for sort of practical reasons. But we will announce something pretty soon, next few days or weeks. I'm not sure about the exact date, which will actually allow you to try our platform for free. Just watch for announcements. I don't want to kind of give information which is not exact.
Good. Yes, I'm looking forward to that. Yeah, exactly. Okay, we're still waiting on a couple more people to ask questions. So while we're waiting on more questions to be submitted, we have some predefined questions we've already asked. So I think I already asked this question. Here's a good one. What are some common misconceptions or challenges that developers face when they're first adopting Temporal? What have you seen as you've seen people pick up Temporal for the first time?
I think it's not misconceptions. I think the challenge is that Temporal is, because you need to create mental picture how it works, right? you kind of need to understand, okay, this is workers do that thing, this is workflow task, this is activity task, right? This is how recovery happens. And if you don't create this picture, I've seen people just taking code and running that and just treating that as normal code without understanding the implications. And then people get developers get confused if something goes wrong, or they don't understand why these things interact this way. So it's not that many concepts, and it's not that complicated. So you usually can learn it in a day or two. And I absolutely recommend our courses for that. Please, if you are starting with Temporal, and even if you already spent some time developing using it, go and do our 101, 102 courses, and we have them available in multiple languages, because they will give you some idea about all of that. And after you go for the initial kind of learning curve, then it's just code. And then it's certainly need to think about your design differently, because it eliminates a lot of complexity, but it's just different way to think about the architecture. But if you just do this initial investment, I think this is most important. Just don't, if you just try to copy samples and modify them and play with them without understanding how these things kind of hold together, you might end up in trouble.
Yeah, fantastic. And since you brought up the temporal courses, it's a good chance for us to bring up that if you take a temporal course from our learn.temporal.io course, I don't know the exact deadlines, but relatively quickly, you can get an exclusive Temporal Summer Camp t-shirt for completing a course. So Max mentioned the 101 and 102 courses. We also have an Intro to Temporal Cloud. We have our Codex Server course, our worker versioning course, and our Interacting with Workflows course. You will also be able to take these courses live at Replay. So we will be doing live trainings on stage at Replay the day before the main conference. There will be 2 tracks. There will be an introductory track and an advanced track. And each of the tracks will be taught, or all of the introductory tracks will be taught in Java, TypeScript, Python, and Go. And the advanced tracks will be taught in Java, Go, and TypeScript. There won't be an advanced Python track this year. So yeah, definitely you have an opportunity to learn about Temporal and get free swag. It's a really good opportunity. So I would take advantage of it. We have another question from the audience who says, I have my own self-hosted temporal cluster. Can Temporal Cloud be used as a failover cluster or vice versa?
So we don't support multi-region replication between open source and the cloud, at least yet. But you absolutely can switch the, so you cannot do live migration. But if you switch the connection string, you don't need to change code, because we guarantee compatibility. So just by switching connection string of your, practically when you connect to Temporal and your clients and your workers, you can start using cloud right away. So it's very easy. And yes, we've seen people, we actually have seen the opposite. Usually when people adopt cloud, obviously there is the whole transition period, but at the end, we've seen people initially when they are not yet trusting us 100%, keeping on-prem clusters just in case, and then using cloud, and and they keep on-prem cluster, and we can switch the connection string to the on-prem if necessary. So, but there is other feature which we are working on is live migration. So practically the idea would be that you would be able to connect the open source cluster to the cloud, and then we'll be able to do live migration from open source to the cloud, including all the workflow state. Practically, you would be able to migrate long-running workflows, and that feature is, and we are working on that. And next step would be also want to do ability to do back, so we'll be able to migrate from the cloud to local host to your on-prem cluster without downtime, including all the state. Will we ever support kind of high availability setup between cloud and on-prem? We are not sure, just because it's obvious that if something goes wrong in on-prem, troubleshooting that will be very hard for us. So we are not sure if we want to go that direction. But certainly, if people want that, tell us. We will consider that.
It would be an interesting problem to solve, but I can, as an ex-SRE, I can totally see how that would be complicated. And we just got a compliment in the Slack. Someone just says, "Awesome! Thank you for all the cool features, especially the new UI. Just want to wish keep going. I'm a really big fan of the technology." So we have some fans, Max, that enjoy Temporal. So that's awesome.
Thank you.
Okay. Let me look at another question. Here's a good question. What are some innovative or surprising ways that you see Temporal being used? And I'll add a little caveat that you never really thought Temporal would make it there. So like just completely surprised you, or did you predict everything?
I didn't predict everything. It's just it's kind of clear that Temporal fits almost any application when you need resiliency, right? If you require resiliency and you're not doing something crazy per key, like in some analytical workloads, Temporal is certainly a very good fit, and it's very broad fit. And yes, we have use cases from IoT devices to practically very high-level workflows. But I remember one of the first interesting, I think the craziest one I've seen is when people use Temporal on desktop and practically local deployment, right? Like I think the craziest one was Cadence, and was one of the first ones, actual external usages, when the whole application was just a desktop application. And back when we only supported Cassandra bindings, so every desktop application was actually shipped with a full-blown Cassandra running in a Docker. So, but the value of Temporal was enough to actually use it for the local application, for desktop application. Certainly, my dream one day to run Temporal, and have ability to run Temporal as part of, for example, mobile phone as a server. In terms of non-trivial, like I'm just thinking. No, I think it's just a variety of use cases. This is what amazes me, that people use it from all sort of infrastructure automation, like for example, deploy a new version of the kernel. At Uber, as far as I remember, requires reboot of every machine, and you don't want to. And there are rules, right? You don't want to like reboot two machines in a single rack, for example, at the same time. So obviously, it's a bunch of workflows, right? So like, you would never think it is a use case for like traditional workflow engine, right? And then control planes. I think control plane for our own cloud, and there are a lot of companies doing control planes, pretty sophisticated control planes. And recently, I'm excited about a lot of AI like use cases, because it's cool to just do kind of interactive chat with AI. But if you want to like something robust and which executes in enterprise environment and guarantee completeness, Temporal is the best glue technology for those use cases, like AI agents and so
on. Cool. We had a feature request. Someone says, consider adding GitHub login for option for Temporal Cloud. So
we absolutely want to add more login options. Yes, we realize that. No guarantees on specifics and when, but yes.
Okay. I guess this is a good question. When shouldn't someone use Temporal? What are some use cases that you think wouldn't be advantageous to use Temporal for? Are there certain types of applications where Temporal wouldn't perform well and you would recommend not using it?
So I think usually the main question I ask is, do you need resiliency? Because sometimes people like the programming model, but they don't care about actually resiliency, and they can just return 500, and they need for them to do compensations, and then say, okay, but there is overhead because Temporal sits on top of database, so there is overhead. And comparing that to fully in-memory implementation, it's certainly slower. And then, yeah, you don't need that because you don't need consistency, you don't need guarantees, you don't need guarantee of completion or guarantee of running compensations. So that probably the first one would be, if you don't need any of that, and you just do it like in memory, for example, you don't need Temporal. That is the main. And then certainly there are certain scenarios when Temporal may be hard. For example, you cannot replace Flink with Temporal, right? So there are certain use cases where Temporal is better than Flink, or like any other streaming technology. But if you need to calculate some sort of, I don't know, metrics over sliding window over a very large number of metrics and like millions per second requests, Temporal would be probably too heavyweight for that like scenario, mostly because single workflow throughput is limited, right? You cannot have single workflow getting hundreds of thousands signals per second. But otherwise, for almost anything business related or any kind of infrastructure or so on and state management, I think it's a good fit. I didn't see many. Sometimes people just, if you have super high rates, it's they can relax certain guarantees, and if you relax guarantees, you can get better performance and make it cheaper. But if you want to get the same guarantees Temporal provides, I think it's a very good fit for almost every use case.
Cool. I guess with a different style of question. What is the story behind the name Temporal? Why did you choose that name for the company? Or you and Samar choose that name for the company?
That was an interesting one. We needed to name the project and company, and I actually even read a book how to name things. And a couple of things which came out of that book, which I kind of agreed with. First, I didn't want a broken word, right? Like there are quite a few companies which named, like you cannot spell them. Also, we wanted real English word. Ideally, want one word, maybe two, and then you also want to have a domain, and then you also want something which is not taken and has some meaning. And as you know, it's not 1992, so it actually was pretty hard. And we had a very long spreadsheet of options, but at some point, Samar stumbled on Temporal, and I think we also had discussion about temporal versus temporal, and we saw people pronouncing differently. At some point, we decided that it's temporal, even if it's like normal pronunciation is temporal, because you clearly see somebody who talked to us and listened to us, and but this is the only. But otherwise, the domain was available for a reasonable price, and yeah, and also it kind of has all this sci-fi kind of semantic, because both me and some are like sci-fi, and and Temporal has this kind of notion of like doing rollbacks and being able to reset workflows to the past. So we kind of manipulate time. So I think all this kind of converged, and we like the name, and I think it was a very good name.
It's a very interesting story. Yes. Real quick, what's one of your favorite sci-fi series? If you only had to watch one for the rest of time, what would you be able to watch for the rest of your life?
I'm actually not very good at watching TV. My parents gave out TV when I was a kid to their friends. I didn't have TV until probably 14 years old. And the only reason they bought it because my father started to work on TV and just wanted to watch my father. So I didn't see any American classic series, right? I read books mostly back then, but recent ones I liked Expanse, and I think I read the book, the whole book series, and that I certainly, I don't know if it was finally canceled or maybe still pending, but I would love to see Expanse, because books, I think I like how books ended with whole series. If you could have the whole TV series around that, would be nice.
We need to. Well, I mean, I think we know some people at Netflix, Max. We can make that happen. So,
absolutely.
Awesome. So, another good question: what real-world examples of AI machine learning projects have you seen benefit from Temporal, or how are AI and machine learning using Temporal in their process?
So, I'm probably not very good remembering names. I'm not sure if I can name specific companies. But it's actually a very common use case, and there are multiple categories of use case. One is most obvious one is the control plane for machine learning pipelines, right? Because they're highly dynamic, these pipelines, and also Temporal allows routing tasks to specific hosts, right? So you can practically cache model and make sure, for example, all activities run on the same host, and it's pretty useful. And then also with Temporal, you can model lifecycle, right? So a lot of these models and machine learning kind of data sets they have life cycle. So it can be, train the model, put in production, watch its quality, retrain it if something happened, and so on and so on. So you can model the whole thing end to end with Temporal. So if you're doing kind of any kind of control plane for that, Temporal is a very good fit. And then there are a lot of things which is actually on the customer facing side, right? So these cool use cases, for example, is like podcast, like practically media processing, right? Because a lot of that, okay, take video, do transcript, right? Do apply some ML model to that, like redo, like generate whatever, like split it multiple tasks in parallel, join them. So there is the whole kind of pipeline end to end, and that is also very common use case. And then the new set of new use cases around agents. Because if you think about it, the first agents were very stupid, right? Like you practically just ask AI something, and AI can use tools to ask a couple questions synchronously, right? And if something fails, you get just error back. But now people actually create specialized models for different agents types, right? And then these agents can communicate to each other, and also they can communicate to the external world, and not only like very simple synchronous calls, but sometimes these interactions can fail or can take long time. So if you think about it, like the whole kind of real agent way it will end up is technically a workflow. It's always kind of this kind of distributed event loop. When you ask AI what to do, then you kind of act on the world, then get more information, ask AI for next steps, or maybe use other AIs and tools. So gluing all this together is actually a very common use case. I've seen the whole platforms built using Temporal around that. And right now in New Jersey, I'm actually talking to one of our potential clients for exactly that set of use cases, when they have pretty interesting practical use case of applying machine learning to their data sets, and a very large number of customers they have.
That's really cool. I'd heard about it for like building AI pipelines, but I'd never considered using it for multimodality. So that's it's always cool to hear how people are using Temporal. Okay, so we have another question that came in. We're actually getting quite a few questions coming in, so that's exciting. Do you have plans to develop some workflow building engine like Camunda Modeler, or will Temporal always be a workflow as code?
So Temporal always will be workflow as code. At the same time, one of my dreams was actually to build DSL SDK. I don't know if I would do it properly, but the idea is that what I don't like about things like BPMN is that they're not use case specific, right? So practically, when you try to kind of implement Java, Go, Python as a bunch of JSON XML, you will fail. Like whatever you do, it will be inferior experience. And also, none of those BPMN cannot be written by non-technical people because it's too complicated, and also hides a lot of complexity because most complexity is in data, not in the sequencing of steps. At the same time, if you have narrow domain, DSLs are awesome, right? If you can come up with DSL, which is simple enough for non-technical people to edit or write or using UI, I think this is where I've seen most interesting use cases and practical use cases. And Temporal is the best technology to be to run those, right? Because the moment you create your own DSL, so I recommend you not take existing DSL like BPMN because it's not good, and it's not DSL, it's not domain specific. But look at your use case and design DSL which is like as simple as possible, but fits your use case, right? Just for your users. And then whatever this DSL is, you always can write a workflow which will interpret the DSL and implement it on top of Temporal, and you'll get all benefits of Temporal plus, but your own DSL. That I 100% support. Will Temporal itself support some of those? Probably not. But ideally, we would make integrating those much easier. We have some ideas how to, for example, create kind of extensions or plugins when you would be able to plug your own DSL into Temporal much more natively, for example. So yes, if you need a DSL, use it. If somebody wants to contribute like a BPMN binding to Temporal, please do it. The only reason to do that probably would be legacy, right? If you have some legacy workflows, you want to run them. But for new code, I just don't recommend that.
That would be a lot of fun. Always remember, Temporal's open source. You can submit a pull request. We have a question here. Will we see higher level workflow primitives added to the SDKs? For example, moving the samples for batches, mutexes, sagas, queues, I think they say event queues per resource exclusivity, and so on. Moving these out of just being samples and moving these as SDK primitives within our SDKs.
So it depends, like, because this list is very diverse. We absolutely want to support batch jobs natively. And I don't know which form we are having discussions, but a lot of people use Temporal to implement batch jobs, like end of month processing, right? Like, I don't know, to generate, I don't know, like PDF per customer, right? With, like, I don't know, whatever invoices they had and so on. And there are all sort of batch job people create with Temporal. So processing large data sets, much more simple way, absolutely should be supported. And what form it will exactly look, we're still deciding, but it's absolutely something which shouldn't be just an example, because it's not good experience when you need to practically understand the samples and write your own workflows to process large data sets. It should be as simple as call workflow for each element of this data set, right? Like kind of map reduce style, and you should be able to do that. So this absolutely will be delivered at some point. At least we are actively discussing this. Things like sagas, if you look at the saga implementation, it is technically just class which just iterates over a list of callbacks. It's much less questionable if this one should be part of core SDK. We might add it, and like Java has it, I wrote one, but so far my understanding in other SDKs, people said, like, why would you need that if you can just write your own? Queues, like, we certainly realize that there are some limitations around how you do, for example, signals. Most basic one is that when you call continuous, new signals are not transferred if they're not consumed. And there are some throughput limitations on signals per key. So we are looking into those. We absolutely want to improve, make our platform much more usable for those use cases. Things like mutexes, I think we are planning to add mutexes. So some of those kind of primitives, we want to make them, we absolutely want to make them part of the SDK.
Yeah, I know we have the Saga primitive in the Java SDK, because we just recently did some, or even not a primitive, but it's just there's an object for it because I just recently worked on some code using that. So I know there's some that exist in some SDKs.
But I think this is an important point, is that you can create it yourself, right? Because the whole idea is that if you look at Saga implementation in Java, it's just a class. It has no dependency on the SDK. So you absolutely can write your own Saga, which uses different approach. And the whole idea is, like, for example, comparing Temporal to something like BPMN, is you can create your own classes, your own abstractions, and inside of workflow code, because it's just normal programming language. So you can create very complex abstractions if you want to. And Saga is a pretty simple one, by the way, which you absolutely can create for your company.
Yes. Someone asks, why do we recommend using Elastic as a visibility store? And then in the comment on the side, it says, we develop for pretty high load temporal usage, few hundreds of workflows, signals, activities per second, and I need to convince my infrastructure team to deploy Elastic instead of Postgre, or will it just work fine with Postgre? So
okay. First, Temporal initially, Cadence at Uber was written for Cassandra only. Cassandra clearly has very severe issues with indexes, especially secondary ones. And we actually were able to bring Cassandra down by just doing queries if you have a large number of items. So we had no choice. We had to add Elastic. The reason we added SQL support, because certainly not everyone wants to run Elastic, especially if you have low throughput use case. And also another reason, we have single binary for development using SQLite. So it's we couldn't have a single binary with Elastic. It just wasn't possible. So this was one of the other reasons we did that. In your case, test it. You certainly can try to test visibility on Postgres and see how it performs, but please create large number of items, workflows which corresponds to your load, and run queries and see how it performs. But certainly, if you are expecting large number of workflows, Elastics will scale much better and provide much better performance. Or just use our cloud; we will take care of that.
Yep, that is always the fun answer. Someone asks, if you were going to start building Temporal now, is there anything you would do or prioritize differently?
I think there are certain APIs I would do differently, and I think the whole interaction model would be a little bit different. One thing to understand, Temporal certainly is a project which is full of compromises. There is actually a funny story is how we started the project, because originally both me and Samar, co-founder of Temporal, we worked on simple workflow service at Amazon. And when we started the project at Uber, the project never was official project, right? We were working on different open source project called Jeremy, which was a pub/sub system actually. And we need background jobs. And we're like, okay, we need background jobs, and how do we do? And we kind of know, let's use ideas from simple workflow to build something. And then I said, Samar, okay, but I don't like the simple workflow APIs and idea, like we can redo it. But he's like, we don't have funding, we don't have people, like we cannot go and spend the next 3 months designing the better shining thing. And we kind of made a pact that we will use kind of basic ideas very similar to simple workflow in APIs, and then we will iterate. So a lot of things which we have now are kind of more like interaction. We iterated over that versus if I would do it completely from new, probably a lot of APIs would be very, very different. But conceptually, I think on a high level, I think we've got it right. And again, not because we so smart, because it was like 5th iteration or 6th iteration. And I think right now, I don't think there are a lot of big things I would change. Certainly, there are a lot of cleanup I would do in the backend. We are doing it right now. There are certain things I would do differently in the SDKs. But I think in general, I think we are in good shape there. For example, if we are doing from scratch, I would have only update. I wouldn't have like query and signal. Just update would be enough, right? But right now we have query and signal for more like legacy reasons. But updated in the future could replace all of them. Just one example.
Awesome. Thank you very much. We are nearing the end of our time, so we'll go with, we have a fun question and a serious question. Which one do you want first?
Let's do fun.
Let's do fun. Sure. Well, what do you use to write code? Are you a Vim person? Do you use Emacs, VS Code? Do you use Notepad?
None of that. I'm the JetBrains guy.
JetBrains.
Yes, I was using Vim, then Emacs, then I started to use Eclipse, and then when I was at Microsoft, I used Visual Studio, right? But with ReSharper, I couldn't write C# without ReSharper, which was JetBrains. And then later at Uber, and here I only use JetBrains tools.
Okay. And then the more serious question is, what is your vision for the future of Temporal? Like, where is Temporal at in 5 years?
I think, okay, obviously we can branch out in a lot of directions and we have all sorts of ideas. But conceptually, first thing is that we want to make sure that every developer is aware about this durable execution idea and kind of has it in their toolkit and they use it. And obviously, I would prefer them to use Temporal because I think in 5 years will be much, much better technology. And so that is one thing. But also, these things like Nexus, for example, we would be able to start creating an ecosystem of activities practically, or like this action services. And then we can see that like we can have companies which only communicate, for example, on their backend through Temporal. And their backend becomes much more maintainable and understandable. In the future, also company to company communication can be done like that. That is one thing. Also, I do see a lot of companies trying to go multi-region, and Temporal certainly can be a company which helps them to do multi-region architectures. This is another part. And then I clearly see us powering a lot of workloads around AI and like agents and so on. So that is another big area of investment for us. And we certainly have a lot of ideas about high-level features, like batches would be one of them, for example. And also one other thing I absolutely want to do is extensions. So this is just idea at this point, but the question is, for example, we have schedules features. Question is why we could provide platform capability to add something like schedules with a fully independent kind of component like extension, which you can write and register with service and everybody gets it. Or the same thing for DSL. Let's say you want to support BPMN. You will write workflow which supports BPMN, connect to Temporal Cloud, register as an extension, and everyone can get those workflows in their namespace running. So then it means that contributing to the platform will be much easier, because it's very hard to contribute to the core Temporal because it's a very complicated platform. But the moment we have extensions, you can start adding things like batches or whatever yourself. And I think this is a very powerful future.
It's exciting. I'm looking forward to it. Okay, well, that's pretty much all the time we have for today. I have a few announcements just to go through. So for those of you that don't know, Temporal is doing a coding contest this summer to kind of get you into using Temporal with a fun little activity. So if you'd like to join that, you scan the QR code that's on the screen here, or you can just look up the Temporal Summer Camp blog and find the coding contest from there. We also, as we mentioned earlier, have Replay coming up. So Temporal's Replay this will be our third annual conference that we do to discuss all things Temporal. We have a really good lineup. We're going to be doing live trainings. It's September 18th through the 20th in Bellevue, Washington. And if you use the promo code webinar20, you can get a discount and come join us. You can see myself. Max will definitely be there as well, and you can ask him all the questions that you like if you can find him. I see there's so many people there. It's often sometimes hard to find people you're looking for. The coding contest can be found here on our Temporal announcement blog. And then you can reminder to take the Temporal learning courses to win yourself a free t-shirt. Tomorrow, join us again for another Temporal Summer Camp event. I will not be hosting this one tomorrow. It will actually be my colleagues on the education team, and they're going to walk you through all the different ways you can learn Temporal using all of the resources that Temporal provides to learn Temporal. I think that's all I have. Max, do you have any parting words?
Thanks for watching. And if you have specific questions or you want to just chat with me, I'm always in Slack. So just go to Temporal Slack and find me there.
Yes, and you can find the Slack by joining temporal.io/Slack, and I'll put that up here on the screen right now for people to be able to find it. So thank you, everyone, for joining in, and we'll see you tomorrow for another installment of the Temporal Summer Camp.